Hello. I think we're almost live. Hi, everyone. I think we are now live. Hi from Los Angeles. I'm Julie Flygar, and I am here with Bob Cloud, who is in Vermont. Say hi, Bob.
Hi.
And we're going to tonight have a very wonderful presentation from Bob, but I will go ahead and get started with some introductions and some announcements. So as people are joining us, and then we will get going with Bob's wonderful presentation. So I am the president and CEO of Project Sleep, if you're not familiar with me, and I am in Los Angeles, as I said. So this February, we will be having Bob present. And so as people are finding this video, I just want to share a few updates. So the Jack and Julie Narcolepsy Scholarship is currently open for 2020 applicants. So if you are a senior in high school with narcolepsy or idiopathic hypersomnia, this is a scholarship for you to be to be able to get towards your college education. So the deadline for that is April 1st to apply for the Jack and Julie Narcolepsy Scholarship. For our advocacy program, I'm really excited because we will be on Capitol Hill this February, and we will be with the Sleep Research Society, and a few patient advocates will be joining us from across the country. It's not a huge advocacy day, it's a limited group, but for this particular advocacy session, we are just bringing people from a few priority states. But I'm really excited to share that we will also be having a webinar about advocacy in early March. So on March 3rd, which I believe is a Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern time, please join us for a webinar about our advocacy program and getting involved. We'll be having an exciting action alert around making progress for sleep research and sleep awareness work. So we'll go over everything you need to know to get involved with that on March 3rd. I'm also really excited to share that the Sleep-In, our 6th annual Sleep-In, will be the weekend of March 13th through 15th. So if you haven't yet participated, you can look at the hashtags from past years on Instagram or Facebook. It's hashtag Sleep-In. This year will be Sleep-In 2020. But if you want to see past years, look up like hashtag Sleep-In 2019 or 2018, and you'll see so many great photos of people from around the world. So it's a virtual event where we challenge people to stay in bed for 12 to 48 hours, and we have lots of different social media efforts and video meetings and stuff like that. So that is going to be the weekend of March 13th through the 15th. And the registration is now live to register for the event, and that is free. And so I will be sending out more announcements and updates about that tomorrow, but I want to share that with you today. And so for today, what we're really highlighting is the Rising Voices of Narcolepsy program. And so this is a program where Project Sleeps helps to train speakers and writers on how to share their story living with narcolepsy or with idiopathic hypersomnia. And so the next training sessions, if you see Bob's presentation today and you really want to become part of the program, the next training sessions will be this summer. So we will have a speaking track and a writing track, and the application for that will be opening in mid-February. So just the next couple of weeks, you have to make sure you're on Project Sleep's listserv or following us on Facebook or Instagram, and you'll see an announcement about that application opening. Oh, one last big announcement. I did share this on social media and on my blog, but I'm really excited to share that I'll be doing a TEDx talk at San Diego State University on March 22nd. So it's been a dream of mine personally, and I'll be talking about the importance of sleep health and sleep disorders. So thank you guys for all your kind words of support and feedback. I've been a little bit nervous and working a lot on that presentation. So thank you guys for all your support. So now on to our main act tonight. Before we get started with Bob's presentation, I just have a few important housekeeping reminders. This is on Facebook, so we encourage you to post comments below the video as things that Bob is saying resonate with you, share that. and hit those cute like buttons or heart buttons as Bob says things that you appreciate. Give a shout out to say where you're watching from. That's always fun to see where people are viewing this from. Please know that it's being recorded and it's public. So as you are writing your comments, you might not want to share private information that you don't want public, and know that this is being recorded for educational and awareness purposes, but we aren't doctors and we can't be giving medical information or medical advice to you. So in your comments and your questions, Bob will be taking questions at the end of his presentation. But remember that this should be questions about his experience, because we can't, for example, give medical advice about your experience. But we always, want people to consult their sleep specialist with any medical questions they have about their experience. You can also share this video with your friends and family. You can hit a share button and it'll, help more people be able to see it and raise more awareness about narcolepsy. And it is recorded, so you can share it later as well. And then let's see, what else? I think that is it for housekeeping. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Bob tonight. And I have to thank you, Bob, especially because we did end up planning this for Super Bowl Sunday. So it's kind of a big a night where you have some tough competition. I think we decided it was probably around the halftime show maybe. So we have some Shakira and some J-Lo, but as Bob knows, he makes me cry every time I hear his presentation, and I choose watching Bob's presentation, and I hope that other people will too. But of course, it will be recorded, and we'll be sharing it after anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and start to share Bob's slides, and then I will read his bio. So let's see. Okay. Bob Cloud is a retired lawyer now living in Northern Vermont. He grew up in Ohio and married an Indiana girl 48 years ago, with whom he has 2 children. Bob practiced family, criminal, and general law for 30 years, during which time he learned to live with narcolepsy. His excessive daytime sleepiness, catalepsy, and related symptoms appeared at age 33, during Bob's first year of night law school. Now, 48 years later, and as a Rising Voices of Narcolepsy speaker, Bob is happy to share his journey in which supportive family, creative doctors, and pharmaceutical providers, and understanding friends stood by him as a husband, father, lawyer, patient, and occasional fisherman with narcolepsy. So with that, please take it away, Bob.
Thank you, Julie, for the introduction. And on that first slide, there's my wife, Margaret. She's around. I think she's upstairs, might be watching the Super Bowl. So with that introduction, we can go back to when I was age 29. And I'd been teaching and served as a counselor in high schools for a period of time, and then we decided that I was going to go to night law school while continuing to work full-time during the day. 4 years later, 2 kids later, I graduated from law school. I passed the Ohio bar, had earned my Ohio Supreme Court license to practice. There they are. And we felt pretty good about life. As the saying goes, life is good. But at the same time, over those last years of law school and then the first years of practice, I began noticing and confronting a series of events not connected, apparently, which began to cause us some worry. Events, and can we have the next slide, please? Events like, there's a picture of a baseball player there on the slide, playing ball, softball with other folks from work, running from one base to another, trying to stretch out a single to a double, and I'd fall flat on my face between the bases. It'd be like a Pete Rose headfirst slide, but I'd end up 10 feet from the base because I had collapsed. My legs, muscles weren't working. Other instances, I'd be playing with or chasing our dog. There's a picture of some concrete steps in the middle of the slide. I'd run up 3 or 4 of those steps and then suddenly collapse backwards down those steps onto the cement, lacerating my head. Or other instances, I'd be with folks in the office, we'd be laughing, joking about something, and my knees would begin to buckle noticeably. And I thought to myself, well, I guess that happens sometimes. Or when I felt playing ball or chasing the dog, I would think, well, clumsy me, run more carefully. Other instances would be when going to sleep sometimes, I'd have what I called then nightmares, though I had never been one to have nightmares. Excuse me. I wouldn't be fully asleep, but Margaret couldn't wake me up either. I'm getting over a cold, I apologize. And those nightmares were always in the form of some person breaking into our house to do us physical harm. And so I would react, I'd lash out or try to lash out. That happened occasionally. Another event that I wasn't prepared for was waking up in the morning, still in bed, just waking up, and suddenly I'd be completely paralyzed. Couldn't move any part of my body, arms, legs, not even a little finger. And that would last for maybe up to a minute or two at the most. And then it would pass. And at that time, we started to realize, after these events over several years, something's wrong. These events shouldn't be happening. We need to see a doctor, but we didn't have a doctor. So Margaret had been working in a clinical lab at a university teaching hospital. So she knew some graduates, knew some residents, knew one that was just starting his family practice. He was in his first year of practice. Next slide, please. So we picked him, and kind of by coincidence, Margaret went with me, and we sat with him, and I was a worried man. And we talked about the sleep attacks. Well, that's one I hadn't mentioned. I'll mention that when Margaret thinks all this happened, started to happen a few years earlier, when all of a sudden I'd fall asleep without any notice. An example would be we'd be sitting at the dinner table, the 4 of us, talking about something, and I would begin a sentence that was appropriate, and I'd end the sentence with nonsense, because in the course of the sentence, I'd fallen asleep and would promptly wake up, but that was a sleep attack. Or I remember taking notes during law school, trying to read case studies, and I'd be sitting there smoking my pipe with a Siamese cat drooped over my shoulders, writing out what happened in a case, and I'd go back to read those notes the next day, and they had turned to scribble, literally falling off the paper. So we talked with the doctor, and I'll call him Dr. First Year, in his first year of family practice, about the sleep attacks and about the can't move experience, the paralysis, words turning to scribble when I was writing, running the bases and falling down, chasing the dogs, the nightmares. And he listened carefully to it all, asked some probing questions, then excused himself for maybe 5 minutes, came back and told me I had narcolepsy, a word I had never heard of. And I didn't realize at the time, we'll talk about this later, but here I was talking to a family doctor, first visit in his first year, going over these symptoms, and he promptly told me exactly what I had, almost unheard of. We'll talk later about the typical delay in getting a diagnosis. Then he explained in narcolepsy. Now, this was back in probably 1979. I had never heard the word narcolepsy. I didn't like the sound of it, but I liked the fact that there was something, a condition that included all these experiences. So he explained that in his understanding then, this is 30 years ago, more than 40 years ago, that narcolepsy is basically he called it a neurological sleep disorder, where the normal stages of sleep are disrupted and fragmented and therefore don't occur at their normal time and the sleep stages in their normal sequence at night. And they burst through at inappropriate times during the day, either as sleep attacks or excessive daytime sleepiness, or as collapsing, where you end up with your muscles in the same form as when you dream. They don't move, your involuntary muscles. So he said, narcolepsy, there's no known cause, no known cure. And it's chronic, it will last all your life. It might be progressive, gets worse for some people, but it's not fatal. And most people receiving some medical treatment and engaging other activities are able to continue working in one form or another. And then he sent me to the University Sleep Disorder Center to confirm his diagnosis. And I learned there that narcolepsy affects 1 in 2,000 people in the United States, about 200,000 people. In the world, that's 3 million people. We'll talk about that later on. And we already talked about it being a chronic neurological disorder of or affecting the sleep-wake cycle. And while there for tests and talking to the sleep doctors over the years, I've learned more about the symptoms of narcolepsy. Basically, they're considered to be 5, listed there on the slide. Excessive daytime sleepiness, which usually takes the form of not being able to stay awake for substantial periods of time during the day, which might be often during the daytime at work. Catalepsy, which is the loss of muscle tone or muscle control, and the most serious form of cataplexy is sudden loss of all involuntary muscle control, and that means you fall down because your leg muscles don't work. A less serious form, partial cataplexy, might take the form of a nodding head if the neck muscles are affected, or slurred speech if the mouth muscles are affected, or drooping arms or hands. Hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucinations. Remember, I talked about what I called nightmares at the time, somebody invading our house, me lashing out. Those are hallucinations, and they're hypnagogic when they occur at the beginning of sleep or going to sleep. Hypnopompic if they occur as they may when waking up. And it's kind of when you're in the twilight zone. Maybe that's why they seem so real. The 4th symptom, sleep paralysis. Recall I talked about the experience of not being able to move sometimes when waking up. And the disrupted nighttime sleep because the normal stages of sleep are no longer occurring in sequence. Basically, there are two types of narcolepsy: narcolepsy with cataplexy, which is the loss of muscle control, and narcolepsy without cataplexy. And over the years, it's been amazing to me how much they've learned about, they being sleep researchers, about sleep and sleep disorders by studying narcolepsy, and especially narcolepsy with cataplexy. When I was first diagnosed, they did not know what the cause of narcolepsy with cataplexy was. They've since learned that it's caused by the near absence or total absence of a neuropeptide or neurotransmitter produced by neurons in the brain. They're called orexin or hypocretin. Their function is to affect the sleep-wake cycle. And for some reason, those with narcolepsy with cataplexy don't have those neurotransmitters anymore. Why they don't have them is another question. There's almost a consensus that it's an autoimmune disease accompanied by some other environmental or physiological triggers, but they're still being researched on that. Less is known about the cause of narcolepsy without cataplexy. Next slide, please. My original visit to the Sleep Disorder Center for diagnosis consisted of two tests. One is polysomnography that takes place at night, where you're wired with electrodes and the technicians trace, or the machine traces, your brain waves and other vital signs during the night. The other test takes place during the day. It's called the multiple sleep latency test, where they measure how quickly one goes into dream sleep or REM sleep during the course of 5 naps during the day. And I mentioned dream sleep or REM sleep. REM, R-E-M, stands for rapid eye movement sleep, which is characteristic of dream sleep. Next slide, please. So the doctor told me what the normal treatment is for narcolepsy at the time, and this is to a large degree true today, taking wake-promoting medications or stimulants to help with daytime sleepiness or excessive daytime sleepiness, including sleep attacks. Nighttime medications for daytime sleepiness to improve daytime sleepiness and to lessen cataplexy. Also antidepressants for cataplexy, not because persons with narcolepsy are depressed, although some are, but because they have learned that the antidepressants suppress REM sleep or dream sleep and therefore lessen the episodes of cataplexy. And then they also discussed trying to schedule daytime naps if and when felt that was helpful. I should mention here that they made great progress in the medications over the 30 years. And now there are 2 new medications approved by the FDA and on the market to improve wakefulness and also to improve cataplexy, and probably 4 more that I know of that are still in clinical trials, not available now until they're approved, but much research is being done, especially along the lines of what they call an agonist, an orexin agonist, which would allow the sleep-wake cycle to be affected by those neurotransmitters. Next slide, please. So we'll come back to this slide, but now I was a person with narcolepsy, and indeed we were a family with narcolepsy. And I thought to myself, well, this is going to be easy. I already get my share of exercise. I'm pretty active. I have a good sleep regime. I usually sleep 8 hours a night at about the same time, which was recommended. It was also recommended that we learn which foods induce sleep or prevent sleep, and which eating habits are likely to induce sleep or prevent sleep. I learned those. And I thought this part's going to be easy. A pleasant surprise was how refreshing the naps were. I never had taken much naps, but I learned that I could be anywhere in a conference or at home, find a chair somewhere against a wall, sit down, lean my head back, set my alarm, cell phone for 15 minutes, and I'd wake up feeling that I dreamt the whole night and feel refreshed. And I would do this, I'd do it riding a bike. The bike picture is there. At the time I was doing triathlons, canoeing, running, and biking with my brother, and I wouldn't hesitate to get off the bike and lay behind a bush and nap for 15 minutes and wake up feeling as refreshed and as strong as I could. Or if I was driving the kids around in a car, so I had the picture of the front seats and dashboard of a car there. The kids would be young, and I'd say to them, if I felt either sleepiness coming on or I just wanted to avoid it, I'd say, you guys, you can talk and listen to your music, but I'm going to take a nap. And I'd put the seat back, set the alarm for 15 minutes, wake up 15 minutes later, feeling like I've been sleeping all night. So that part of learning to live with narcolepsy was easy. But what was difficult was the medications. The stimulants and wake promoting drugs, they worked. They were easy. I still take those. But the medications to lessen catalepsy, those medications were developed for another purpose, and we were using them with a permitted different use to lessen catalepsy. Many of those drugs, like the antidepressants, as I mentioned, their function was to suppress REM sleep. And in my case, they would work. One would work for several months. I'd improve, but then my body would become tolerant to them, and they not only stopped working, but if I withdrew from them with my doctor's permission, the effect was in intensity, in the frequency, and the type of catalepsy, the collapses. And I probably went through half a dozen of these medications, experimenting with my doctor over the years. And each time the tolerance developed, and I withdraw from one to start another, and the catalepsy would go up another plateau. So this started probably a 3-year period of serious, repetitive, increasing catalepsy. Can we go back to slide 3, please? There, thank you. So I've put another couple of pictures here of events or experiences I started to have with the increased catalepsy, which could happen anytime, anywhere. I remember regularly standing in the bathroom and something would happen to trigger the catalepsy, and I'd think to myself, I'm going to collapse and fall down and bang my head on the porcelain sink. Or I'd be at the top of an escalator and I would have a sudden unforeseen catalepsy attack, and I think, I'm going to fall down on this escalator and it'll probably take me to the bottom. And that's what I thought would happen, and that's exactly what did happen almost immediately. Or I'd be on a dock. Out on the dock, we had a boat, or I'd fish off the dock,
something would happen, and I think to myself, I'm going to fall down and I'm going to fall into this deep water over my head. I hope I can relax enough to get my head above water. And that's exactly what happened. I should mention the thing that would happen to trigger the cataplexy attack. And I learned this at the first visit to the sleep specialist, was an emotional reaction. Could be excitement, could be anger, often laughter. And that's when the cataplexy would burst through unexpected during the day, burst through almost immediately and cause an immediate and total collapse. I remember the escalator one because it did take me down to the bottom of the escalator, but didn't take me all the way off. So I lay there unable to move a muscle, and each succeeding step cut my scalp. Amazingly, nobody else was on the escalator, nor was there a security guard around. Typically, after a cataplexy attack, which might last several seconds up to a couple minutes, and during that time, I, or anybody with that type of attack, would normally be alert, know what was happening, but unable to talk, unable to move any muscle, could hear and see, but not communicate in any way. Until at the end of those few minutes, you could stand up and tell somebody what had happened. In the escalator incident, I stood up and walked out the store, and nobody ever said a word, surprisingly. As those attacks kept getting worse and worse, it got to the point where I couldn't cross the street and see a wait walk sign change without collapsing in the middle of the street. Or I couldn't hear a phone ring without collapsing. And I had reached what my doctor called a continuing state of cataplexy. And he had tried all the medications he knew about, but he was a researcher, and he was aware of research being done in Canada on not a new medication, a medication that was somewhat old, had been around, but a doctor there was using it to treat patients and noting the effect it was having on persons with narcolepsy, especially cataplexy. So he got in touch with that doctor, and we should go back to where I was. Well, I'll stay there for a minute. Well, you don't have to. There was a picture of a puppet there with puppet strings. And I would often compare a cataplexy attack with a puppeteer cutting all 5 strings at one time, and that's what causes the collapse. And I would end up like the puppet on the right of that slide. Except that little guy looks kind of comfortable. I was never comfortable. Usually some arm or leg would be bent at an intolerable angle. So that, my own doctor, my sleep specialist, communicated with and arranged for me to go to the hospital in Toronto, Canada. And I had to spend 3 weeks there in a wheelchair because I'd be withdrawing from the other medications and the cataplexy would increase. And towards the end of that, I started on the new medication. Interestingly enough, the new medication had been around for a long time, was compounded in France, put together, then shipped to this doctor in Toronto. And when I returned from Toronto 3 weeks later, it would be shipped down to me. So it was a long journey. And then because it proved to be so effective so quickly, my doctor applied to the FDA to get an individual investigative new drug approval so he could continue to treat myself and maybe a dozen others in our area and from outside the area
with this medication. And that began what I call the 20 Years' War. That was 1982 when I went to Canada and came back. And I often wondered to myself and said to others and said to doctors, why me and why us? Why can't other folks who have cataplexy to any extent also benefit from this medication? The problem was it had a medical benefit use that it was developed for a couple of decades earlier, but was no longer used in that way. And the Drug Enforcement Agency would say it has no known medical benefit to persons. And we would say to the FDA, oh, yes, it does. Look at us, look at other persons with narcolepsy. Finally, at the end of 20 years, in 2002, that medication was approved by the FDA and is now used in large part by persons with narcolepsy. I was about to say narcolepsy with cataplexy, but it's also been approved because of its effect on excessive daytime sleepiness. So then for the next 20 years, I was able to continue my law practice. I should note that I took that same medication and the same dosage last night as I have every night for the past 38 years. Same dosage, and it has the same effect. And I can probably do 90% of what I want to do. Still, the narcolepsy and the cataplexy raises its ugly head sometimes if I'm tired or haven't gotten enough sleep or doing something I haven't done before. I have to be careful. I know that I'll collapse. Next slide, please. And I still go fishing, and there's nothing like the strike of a good fish to excite me enough to fall down. And I don't put my chair too close to the edge anymore because I know that could cause problems. Surprisingly, it hasn't caused many problems in the law practice. For one, practicing law, especially a solo practice like mine, you can pretty much control your own schedule. A lot of my law practice was family and criminal law, and so there was a lot of courtroom work. But you could always anticipate, I found, what the emotions were going to be and prepare for them, so there wasn't any sudden surprise. What I find the two most difficult emotional triggers now are very funny laughter, especially in the family, where things are the funniest. My son will often make a remark and crack a joke and run to try to catch me before I fall. Or if I get angry with my wife, and that does happen sometimes, even after the 48 years. And if I disagree with her and feel kind of strongly, she'll see my eyes start to dart back and forth like they do in rapid eye movement sleep. And she knows I'm angry before I even show it or say anything. So I lose those arguments, even though I'm on the winning side. And I mention these because these incidents, because I think it helps. It's helped me a great deal over the years to talk with other persons with narcolepsy, to go to conferences, to meet with groups, because I get hope from talking with other people, learning their successes, and learning that I'm not alone. There are 200,000 people, at least in the United States, who have narcolepsy. My daughter lives in Liverpool, home of probably the world's greatest soccer team. And they have a motive song they call Walk On, which I think expresses the same feeling I'm trying to convey here. And you can read the lyrics. Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, though your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that my experience was being accurately diagnosed by the doctor in his first year of general family practice on our first visit, which I mentioned is almost unheard of, because even today, the average delay between onset of symptoms and eventual diagnosis is 8 to 15 years. And during that time, individuals will not know they have narcolepsy. They have something fragmenting their life. They might be misdiagnosed with other things, and that is unacceptable. Probably under 50% of people currently diagnosed, under 50% of people with narcolepsy are currently diagnosed. The rest remain undiagnosed. Next slide, please. I often ask myself, why me? Not why me having narcolepsy, but why me having the experience of my doctor accurately diagnosing me the first time I saw him? Or why me living in a town that I could have a sleep specialist who's one of the handful of most respected sleep specialists in the world with his research, in which I benefited from, and who was willing to send me to Canada. So I'm willing and have been happy to talk about my individual journey with narcolepsy, which began in my mid-30s. Most people with narcolepsy will get it in their early or late teens or early 20s. More and more, it's being diagnosed in pediatric patients. And everybody's different, but I know that most other persons with narcolepsy will get it earlier than I did, and therefore will have it longer and in a different way because of their own circumstances. And everybody has to have and talk with their own sleep specialist. But I'm happy to talk with any individual or any group at any conference at any time to share my story and to share a little bit more hope and to contribute my voice to the Rising Voices of Narcolepsy. Thank you for listening.
Yay. Thank you, Bob. Thank you for sharing your story tonight. How you doing?
I'm good.
Yeah, you're hanging in there? I know it's getting late on the East Coast.
Drink a little coffee.
Yes. I just love Bob's story, and I should mention that his journey as part of the early use of the nighttime medication to it getting approved. Like, I had studied that whole approval back when I was in law school, so 12 years ago. And I'd actually written about Bob and some of his testimony that he'd given in a paper I wrote in law school. And so it's always just like, I remember the first time he emailed me, and just getting to know Bob and have him be part of this program means so much to me, because to me, he was already like a big celebrity. And I'm just so thankful for him and all that he does to be part of this, but also to talk to anyone, like he said, that wants to chat about their experience. It really means a lot, in all the ways you've given back over the years. So thank you, Bob.
That's why we value Project Sleep so much.
Thank you. If you have any questions, Bob has we have time for a few questions. And we'll get those over to us. Let's see. I should have mentioned that sooner so people could write in their questions. Let's see. Well, I think we did have a question about your law practice. So how did you mentioned it a little bit, but it just seems pretty impressive that you were, a lawyer. So how did you balance your job as an attorney through all this?
Well, you did what you had to do, I guess. You tried to limit your work. The most important thing was getting 8 hours sleep. And so that left you time to prepare a case or to talk with clients, but you might not spend the time that you would want to spend. And I mentioned there were rarely any problems, but in that, as well as other activities, if I knew that there could be a problem, then I would tell somebody I trusted ahead of time, which might be a prosecutor, I was a public defender, or the judge, or probation officer, or somebody. So if I were to have or suffer partial or complete catalepsy, they'd know what was going on. And I would do that in other activities. If I was in a gym working on a treadmill or going fishing with other people, I would make sure somebody knew what was going on. But a couple instances in the law practice, which I remember now, two always stick out. One was I interviewed a client and we hit it off. The chemistry was right. I was going to represent him. I walked him out of the office to his car, and halfway to his car, I collapsed flat on my face. I never saw that client again. A more serious and kind of intriguing event was I was representing a fellow on a robbery charge, and we had a jury trial, and at the end of the trial, the judge reads the instructions to the jury, and the defendant and his lawyer and me sit there and listen to make sure the instructions are fair. And I woke up at the end of those jury instructions and realized that I missed them all. My first concern was for my client that nothing unfair was given to the jury as an instruction. So I met with the judge and the prosecutor right away, told him what happened, asked him to read back the instructions with the court reporter, which they did, and they were okay. My next concern was my client deserves to know that. And if I tell him that I fell asleep at that point, I'm going to have to tell him that he should get advice from a separate lawyer, and that separate lawyer might want to file an appeal, which is exactly what happened. The lawyer filed the appeal based on ineffective assistance of counsel because counsel fell asleep. But the appellate judges read over the trial transcript, found that no mistakes were made, and the conviction was upheld. But it did present kind of an ethical dilemma at the time. Aside from those two, the practice was not much affected by my narcolepsy, although my wife disagrees with me. She thinks it was affected substantially. She thinks I probably saw less clients and got less clients because of it. That may or may not be true.
But you're willing to admit it, so maybe there's some truth. The truth is somewhere in the middle.
There's some truth in there, yeah.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I think sometimes I struggle between giving a big message of hope and because I really do a lot with my life, but there's sometimes limited. We talk about the spoon theory, and sometimes we have limited spoons, so we have to choose our priorities a little bit more closely sometimes, or just can't always do it all. So
You like to do more. But my son always says, "Don't let the perfect get in the way of the good."
exactly, that has been the motto of the day for me recently. So I love it. I don't know if we have any more questions on the Facebook. I'm not seeing any right now. And we are at a good time to probably wrap up. So,
That's fine.
but we will be sharing this a lot on Facebook and over the different social media sites. And yeah, I don't think we have any other questions. So we'll go ahead and say goodnight. Oh, let's see.
I might mention if there's a video available and if somebody you learn of wants to send me an email, you're free to give out my email address.
Thank you. I will probably end up doing that. So thank you for permission. So, okay, well, I guess we are good to say good night and hope whoever's team wins the Super Bowl that people are rooting for. I'm not really sure. But we will go ahead and see everyone again next month on, I think it's going to be March 1st will be our next broadcast. It'll be a Sunday night at this same time. And thank you again for joining. And thank you to Bob for sharing your wonderful story. And thank you, Margaret, for being on tech support and support life, just general awesomeness of life support, partner support. So
let me mention one other real quick little incident that I just learned of. But Margaret told me back when, in those worst years when I was having all the catalepsy attacks and so on, that she would walk behind me all the time, ready to catch me. And I'm thinking, I had no awareness of that you were trying to walk behind me all the time to catch me.
Wow. Isn't it funny? I mean, that's why I think the power of sometimes having a loved one go with you to a doctor's appointment too, because they really do have a different perspective on your own experience that you don't even realize. So
they do.
Yeah. Oh, we do have one more question from the Facebook. Someone asked, Rachel asked, what first sparked your interest in participating in the Rising Voices of Narcolepsy program?
Well, more than anything, Project Sleep and all it does to try to inform folks about narcolepsy. And I enjoy talking with people. I've done this in conferences, so it was something that interested me. I'm happy to do it.
Well, we're so glad to have you be part of this program. And let's see if there's any more questions. Okay, we have a question from Matt. Says, I'm assuming this is a fishing question. Live bait or lures?
Whatever works, Matt.
Whatever works. Okay, I love it. And hi to Matt and Rachel, and thank you to everyone that has joined us tonight. You guys are the best. This team is an incredible group, and we're just so glad to be able to share, get people out there and sharing their story. So, all right, with that, we'll say good night. Thanks again, Bob.
Thank you.
All right, bye everyone.